Hi everyone, this is Jumana Ibrahim coming to you from Dubai. I'm a visual design teacher at Istituto Marangoni here in Dubai. And today I'm going to talk about street and contemporary art in post-conflict cities, how they're expressions of memory, heritage, and identity. I will particularly focus on my hometown, Beirut, and on Lebanon, my country. But before we delve into the topic, I would like to give a bit more context into the recent history of Lebanon, a brief overview. So, the Lebanese Civil War, which ended in 1990, lasted 15 years from 1975. It was a complex and devastating conflict rooted in deep sectarian divisions, which we can still witness today in Lebanon. Uh, it was also rooted in regional tensions and foreign interventions. And it began as clashes between communities, but it quickly became a conflict that was influenced by regional tensions. And over 15 years, Lebanon experienced widespread destruction, political fragmentation, and the complete collapse of state institutions. So the war ended in 1990, and the reconstruction of Beirut, but mostly downtown Beirut, which was heavily affected by the conflict because it was at Beirut was divided into two sectors, east and west, and downtown Beirut was in the middle of the conflict zone. And this photograph, which was taken in 1994 by Akram Zaatari for documentation, was unearthed and exhibited again last year, and it shows the state of downtown Beirut right after the war, but also it was a way to criticize how the reconstruction was taking place at the time. Fast forward to 2019, the Lebanese Revolution, which started in October and ended in February 2020. It was a nationwide leaderless protest movement, which was sparked because there was a tax that was proposed by the government on WhatsApp calls, and this was the straw that broke the camel's back. It quickly grew into a mass mobilization against corruption, economic mismanagement, rampant poverty, and the sectarian political system. Citizens from all sects and regions demanded systemic change, accountability, and social justice. And despite the peaceful and creative forms of resistance, whether through art or just, peaceful protests, the movement faced political inertia, economic collapse, and sometimes violent repression. But it did mark a turning point in public political consciousness. The emergence of street art after 2019 October Revolution was a democratic expression of a new generation's social and political realities. So, in a post conflict city like Beirut, street art and contemporary artistic endeavors actually focus on mending the sectarian divides created by wars and their aftermath. So today we're going to talk about how Lebanese street art is a contextual reflection on social, political, and historical events. We'll look at post-war Lebanese contemporary art and its limits, the lessons that local contemporary art can learn from revolutionary street art, and we'll look at a comparative analysis between street art and contemporary art, and we'll end with closing reflections. So let's start with Lebanese street art is a contextual reflection on social, political, and historical event. So although Lebanese street art gained prominence during the 2019 revolution, its roots trace back to the mid 20th century, particularly after Lebanon's independence from the French Mandate in 1943. So, in the absence of a unified national identity, sectarian political groups use street art, especially posters like on the left-hand side and graffiti like on the right-hand side, to assert their ideologies and commemorate leaders and martyrs. On the left-hand side, this is the commemoration of, this is a poster that commemorates a fighter for a militia. And those posters specifically were influenced by Arab, Iranian, and communist aesthetics. And during the war, between 75 and 1990, The street art became a powerful tool for political and religious factions to not only express ideologies but assert territorial control and intimidate outsiders. Um, Representations of leaders, slogans, and war events appeared in various forms like graffiti and tags, as in the image on the right-hand side, and it transformed public walls into visual markers of dominance. And militias commonly use graffiti to define boundaries, intimidate outsiders, enforce control, and they turn street art into instruments of fear and authority. Here's another example. There are two other examples that I would like to show. So here we see a street artwork designed, created by A. Musawi in the 80s, and it depicts Amal militia symbolism and anti-Israeli propaganda with Syrian soldiers standing nearby. There's a decomposing Star of David that engulfs a skull, which symbolizes the enemy. And you can see around it, there are Amal fighters that are launching rockets towards it, and they represent resistance and victory. Overall, the dark, muted color palette and militaristic imagery emphasize intimidation, propaganda, and the artist's alignment with militia narratives. The last example from the Civil War is that one. So here we can see a young boy pointing an assault rifle at a mural of the Gemayel family, a family of Christian politicians that became very prominent during the Civil War. And they were not very liked by some communities. So there's no surprise then that after the Civil War, street art suffered a very bad reputation, and artists who became apolitical after the Civil War, or the new generation of artists who were apolitical, worked in an anonymous way because they were scared of repercussions. But the problem with Lebanon is that instability, wars, and unrest are always a threatening possibility. So in 2006, those same artists, those same apolitical artists who were witnessing the 2006 war between Lebanon and Israel took to the streets to write messages of peace and hope, like in this example where artist Siska writes, Beirut ma بتموت, Beirut never dies. There are other examples here also that emerged during the war, the 2006 war, but also during the years that followed the war, during which Lebanon was going through a very violent internal political crises. And here we have on the left-hand side a graffiti by Kabrit, which says our city. And on the right-hand side, the same artist, Kabrit, is writing Beirut. So fast forward to 2019, during the revolution, as I mentioned before, street artists were using their art freely and completely, they were identifying themselves also while creating those artworks in Lebanon. And this marked a turning point for street art, where a new generation of artists took to the streets to express their political and social frustrations. So building on the groundwork laid by earlier graffiti artists, these creatives used public art as a democratic and unfiltered form of protest. For the first time since the Civil War, artists openly criticized the ruling elite without fear, and street art became a legitimized and encouraged medium of resistance. There are also famous artists that took to the streets, like Salim Mawad. So what Salim Mawad really wanted to do is to express the frustrations of the Lebanese people, but also through his different artworks, he wanted to inform the Lebanese citizens about their civil rights and the Book of Law. In those two examples, we see minotaurs that depict the Lebanese political elite. And what Salim Awad was trying to do is he was trying to symbolize the tension between the good and evil, visually embodied, and he visually embodied the revolutionary spirit through bold red typography and symbolic imagery. Mawad's compositions called for the end of sectarianism, like on the left-hand side, where he says, sectarianism is not your religion, sectarianism wrecked us all, and the revival of shared memory, like on the right-hand side. So his work aimed to reflect societal realities and empower citizens as agents of change. Here are other examples on the walls that were built to protect a UN institution, ESQUA, and you can see different artists expressing themselves in different styles and languages, which really shows the democratic aspect not only of, the event that was taking place, the social and political event that was taking place, but also of art itself. So in 1990, at the end of the war, there was a no victor, no vanquished amnesty law, which meant that crimes committed during the war were exempted from criminal prosecution. And now from this, we can understand why the 2019 revolution was so important, because those warlords who were exempted from their crimes were still in power and are still in power today. Given that information, Lebanese contemporary artists wanted to keep the memory of the war alive, and they did it in different ways. So the unearthing of archival material and artifacts helped to frame the public debate around collective memory and state-imposed amnesia. One needs to understand that in Lebanon in 1990, after the war, there was a big, so the war became a taboo subject, especially amongst politicians, and they wanted the people to really forget about it. And this is why there was a state-imposed amnesia. So to this day, there is no museum in Lebanon that commemorates the war. In this example, by artists Joanna Haji Touma and Khalil Jirej, what they try to do is to revive the memory of the war through a fictitious character. So this project, which is called Wonder Beirut, and which is a series of postcards that were created between 1998 and 2006, they, through a fictional character, Abdallah Farah, they symbolically document the war's destruction by burning negatives of pre-war Beirut. These altered images, presented as postcards, juxtapose nostalgic 1960s photographs with the damage of war. The burn marks, as we can see on both visuals, distort the vibrant, idealized past, transforming it into a darker, more unsettling reflection on historical trauma and memory. Another example from a contemporary artist is Marwan Reshmawi's Monument for a Living, which is present at Tate Modern. And what this tower, this human-sized tower, represent is memory through sculpture. And the work is a concrete scale model of Beirut's Burj Al Mor, a high-rise building used by militias during the civil war and that is now decaying and closed off to the public. By replicating the tower at human scale and exposing its internal structure, Reshmawi invites viewers to engage physically and symbolically with a building they cannot access in real life. The piece transforms a site of violence into a contemplative monument and is now part of Tate Modern's permanent collection. Another example here is the missing exhibition that took place in 2008 at UNESCO Palace, and this exhibition um, was designed to commemorate the missings, the people that have gone missing during the war. So we don't know what the fate of these people is up until today. And the idea was to create an exhibition to so that they don't fall into oblivion. So, what lessons can local contemporary art learn from revolutionary street art? Now that we've shown uh, case studies from both genres. Most post-war Lebanese artists were educated in Western institutions and understood the lingo of Western contemporary art. Their work, therefore, was influenced by Western trends, and their form catered to international audiences. Here we can see two examples, one of contemporary art and the other of revolutionary art. And although both kind of they have the same spirit in mind, in the sense that on the left hand side, Rabia Mroué is trying to represent violence in the Arab world. On the right-hand side, the walls of shame that were erected during the revolution in 2019 to protect the internal defense forces were heavily tagged by street artists who wanted to reclaim downtown Beirut. And on the right-hand side, we can see a graffiti that says, "Beirut is ours." So the comparative analysis between street art and contemporary art goes as follows. Street art is collective, public, immediate. It uses accessible languages and forms. It reclaims public spaces. It's participatory in nature, and it's very inclusive. It does not discriminate, and it does not ask you who you are. It brings artists local exposure with wide impact. On the other, on the other, on the other hand, contemporary art is more individual, it's institutional, it's delayed. In Lebanon, it was right after the war, pretty Western influenced, but for sure it's elite coded. It's not accessible to everybody because it's mostly present in gallery and museum spaces. It's conceptual and exclusive, and it does have global exposure, but with limited local reach. So, despite their differences, both street and contemporary artists should continue to create works that document, archive, and bear witness, often with the aim of giving a voice to the voiceless. Thank you for listening.